Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Yale SOM Exchange webinar, Theater After COVID. Yale SOM Exchange is the Yale School of Management's series of online conversations. This series provides alumni and the entire Yale SOM community with opportunities to keep learning about faculty research, current events, and career strategies. And we're also joined today by many folks from the David Geffen School of Drama. I'm Florrie Seary. I'm the Associate Dean and Assistant Professor Adjunct of Theater Management at the David Geffen School of Drama, and I'm the Managing Director at Yale Repertory Theater, and I use she, her pronouns. I would like to introduce our wonderful panelists who are graduates, alumni, and also I would count them as my good friends and colleagues. So in alphabetical order, we have Michael Barker, who's an SOM and drama class graduate of 2010. Michael is presently the managing director at the Westport Country Playhouse, just down the road a piece. And at the Playhouse, he partners with Mark Lamos, the artistic director, and leads a staff of about 30 employees and hundreds of freelance artists, and they do great work. And prior to that, Michael was in Mill Valley and Marin Theater Company. My next wonderful panelist is Al Hartley, who's a drama class graduate of 2018. Al is the principal at ALJP Consulting, which is a search firm and strategic planning firm. You name a hot search, Al's firm has done it. He recently very successfully led the search for the executive director of ART up at Harvard and the artistic director of New York Theater Workshop. And our final panelist is Kiara Klein, who is a dual degree SOM and drama of 2017. Kiara just recently started at the Public Theater as the director of producing and artistic planning. And prior to that, she spent 3 years at Baltimore Center Stage as a creative producer, working with another wonderful grad, Stephanie Ibarra. So I'm very, very excited about our panelists and about this conversation. And I would just say to the folks listening that as we're going to speak for about a half an hour, 35 minutes, and then we're going to open the floor to questions, but the question mechanism is in the chat. So as you have questions, you can put them in there and we'll handle them about 30 minutes from now. As we're starting this, I was thinking, this is theater, and we're going to talk about theater. We're going to talk about the art, the artists. It's something that we all love because that's why we're all here attending this webinar. It's a way to come into community, to experience emotion, to explore the human condition. So I want everyone in this webinar to just take a moment, take a breath, close your eyes, and think about the last production you saw, the last play, the last musical. Just close your eyes and just think about what feelings you had with that experience. Just try to get in touch with that. And then I'm going to ask each of our panelists to just share, a couple of, what the show was and what they were feeling. And I'm happy to start this because I have the idea for the prompt, so I have an idea. So the last show I saw was a production of 101 Dalmatians. It was a new production in Regent's Park in London. And that's their equivalent to, say, the Public Theater. And Doug Hodge, the wonderful actor, Doug Hodge was actually the writer on the production. And there was an actor that I knew in the production. And it was just thrilling to be with, multi-generations of folks who are just taking in a really fun night of theater and having a great time. And I welcome our panelists to share their last experience and their feelings.
Okay, I'll go. So my last production that I saw was the current production of As You Like It in at Shakespeare in the Park, which is maybe cheating because I'm producing it. But I got to go on Friday and take my 4.5-year-old niece to it, which was way past her bedtime, but she was wrapped the entire time. And I've seen that show now many, many times, which is this really joyful musical rendition that features over 100 New Yorkers on stage, in addition to like the professional actors. And to watch her, my favorite moment probably was watching her face when this trick happens where the letters fall from the trees, and she was just like, it was just like watching the magic on her face was just so like incredible. And especially for a kid that loves theater but hasn't gotten to experience a lot of it because of COVID, it was just really, really special. And so that was like just amazing.
Oh, that's so great, Kiara. Wow. Al?
Sure. The last production I saw and this was the last time I was in New York, was Into the Woods, that's on Broadway. And I just had to, I had to experience a show that I've experienced throughout my lifetime. And there was something where I felt two things. One, it felt like you were in an audience where like rock stars were on stage. I mean, I've never seen such a raucous crowd for a musical that in the second act turns really dark. And yet at the same time, I felt such an elation because I think many people had this feeling of release, had this feeling of being back together again, watching a story that feels all the more relevant about how are we going to conquer the big giant. And so there was both this feeling of elation and this real reverence of the moment we're in, the show that, or what that show tries to capture, just about the human condition and human spirit. So that's what I'll say is my
Wow.
experience.
Thank you, Al. Michael?
That was my second choice one. And I gotta say, that's a testament to people doing community theater and school theater. Lots of schools do it. And it's a testament to that PBS capture with Bernadette Peters that all of us grew up watching, right? Because we were all going while you were talking. The last show I saw was 4,000 Miles at the Playhouse, which is probably a cheat too, because I had to see that for my work. It's a play written by Amy Herzog, who actually is a drama school graduate, a David Geffen School of Drama graduate from 2009. We had a wonderful actress, Maya Dillon, who has been, her first show at the Playhouse was 1979. So it was a wonderful, David Kennedy, who's another drama school grad, directed it. Wonderful production of a very small play that tells sort of a small story about two people who find each other and find a way to live together in the same world. But the thing that I would express here on a kind of a business school webinar is that the house was full. The house was full again. And this is not to say that we are done with audience issues, but we have been creeping back. And that for me was the relief at the end of that run to see the line at the box office. It was so substantively different. And that release that Al talked about was present at that. And we didn't have rock stars. Even they don't have rock stars, but yeah.
That's amazing. We are going to talk about audiences, but that's quite exciting to hear that you saw a bit of a bump, because we know that a lot of theaters are struggling. So I want to address the elephant on the table, the title of this panel, Theater After COVID. So many industries have moved on and stopped testing, and folks are coming back to the office. And if someone gets COVID, they stay home, they work remotely, it's no big deal, they come back. But for theater, we are very much still in COVID because very little of our work can be done remotely. Certainly actors can't work remotely, crew can't work remotely. It's difficult for designers to work remotely. It's hard to sell tickets remotely. So we're still very much into COVID. And I want to actually turn it over to Kiara to talk about how we're making the work right now. What is happening backstage, on stage? How are we making work?
Yeah, it's a really big question. I mean, I think that in many ways, we are making, in many ways, we're making work or attempting to make work exactly as we always have. And in many ways, we're finding how the pressures of some of the ways that we did it before simply not working it the same way. We can't move with the same, we don't get to control the speed with which we do things in the same kind of way. We're facing massive, we have to think about coverage for people in not just in production, but in rehearsal and in backstage and in staffs. We are, and frankly, I think that we talk a lot, and there was a lot of debate or discourse anyway over the last year or two about like what it meant to like be on pause, because many of us felt like we were not paused, and yet many of the ways that we're doing things were paused. And so I think that therefore there is a backlog of work. There are projects that were planned for 2 years ago that we're seeing now, and that has lots of ramifications and implications. But I think that overall, how we are continuing to put one foot in front of the other, like we always have, and in so doing, I think it very much continues to feel like you're building a boat while you're in the boat, while you're flying while you're trying to change the boat into an airplane, and also your expertise is theater, not airplane engineering. And so I think we're doing it with like quite a lot of it's all these different pressures and that are compounding to to make that we're, and then of course the urgency and the incentives to kind of keep moving forward. So I don't know, that's sort of like the high level view of a short answer of the way that we've always been doing it, but with all these different new factors, and then trying to find the ways to then adapt and evolve, because what we know is that some of the ways that we used to get away with doing things, like putting a lot of people together in small spaces for long periods of time, being able to take for granted that people were going to be able to sort of monitor their own health and then kind of figure it all out, that all isn't the case anymore. Yeah, so it feels really different.
Kiara, can you address what's happening in terms of COVID protocols?
Yeah, so I think that many theaters are really different. I can speak to what's happening at the public, which is that we still have, everyone is required to be vaccinated and boosted. We have masking is required inside of all buildings, and the only people that can take their masks off are performers while they're performing. We PCR test twice a week. We rapid test almost daily. We have like a check-in on our phones that we have to like pass the clearance of a daily check-in when we come on site. I'm wearing this because I passed the check-in. And right now our audiences, we've been requiring masking in our audiences. I think that in New York, the shift is moving towards audiences not being masked, or being masked only on certain performances. So kind of adapting to this idea that like we're going to rely more and more on our air filtration and on the distance between the audience and the actors. But we're still seeing spikes. We're still seeing lots of cases. Our production of As You Like It, with 130 people, has been complex and really with a lot of kind of coverage, and they've done a really, really great job. And I think that the thing that I'll name is that there's a whole host of ways that you like, our job is to not prevent COVID from happening. And that's one of the things that I think is really hard, is that we would like to just sort of prevent it, but the best we can do is sort of is prevent the spread, is to contain cases when they happen, which requires, people to be out for 10 days at a time, 5 days at a time, depending on their symptoms and depending on the testing, and then isolation and all of that. And then, but the thing that's really real is that even if, our medical experts say that it's safe and we have the coverage and all of that, or that the risk is not higher than it was yesterday, the psychological impact is really real, because we are trained and we still fear this virus a lot. It does not feel the same as getting the flu, even though people keep talking about it. And I think so the psychological impact is really real. And sometimes making calls that no, it's actually safe to perform, doesn't necessarily take into account the fact that people are really still anxious about it and they might not feel safe, even though our expertise says that it is. And I think that really creates a lot of complications as well. And trust, the trust in institutions overall is really far down, which means that when now you add the sort of trauma of our mistrust of how health is handled, and who are you to tell me that my health is safe? The stakes are not really supposed to be this high for producing theater.
I echo everything you said, especially our job is to prevent COVID. I mean, I don't think you took a class at the David Geffen School of Drama in that, preventing COVID, or at SOM.
No, I probably should have done the public health degree instead of the drama degree or something.
So I want to actually, you're talking a lot about what's happening in the workplace and the intensity and the lack of trust. And I want to actually hand it over to Al to talk a little bit about, we're big conversations about the Great Resignation, about burnout, issues of working from home. And so issues that impact staffing, leadership change, what kind of leaders are we looking for? And I thought that would be a great segue for Al. So here we go.
No, sure, absolutely. And I think it's similar to a lot of what Kiara is talking about in terms of, things and workplaces trying to operate in the ways that they used to, but very much having to figure out new ways of working and how to work, not only in relation to COVID, but also in relation to, of course, the racial reckoning that's been happening since 2020 and even beyond in the theater field. And so I think there's a couple of big points that are pretty clear, at least to me, and they follow, frankly, the trends that we read about even nationally. Yes, do workplaces have to have more flexibility in terms of how they work, what they offer in terms of remote work? Do they offer remote work versus hybrid work, where it's basically saying you need to be in the city, but you are more than welcome to work from home, being in the city, versus remotely, where you could be working for an Oregon Shakespeare Festival from Miami, Florida. And that is becoming something that we're starting to see, different employers have to offer and really have to grapple with. I think another big point is how, we are looking at not only bringing people into the field, but retaining them in roles and in jobs throughout all levels of an organization. I've spoken to, many different managers across the country who are saying, yes, the burnout level is high. To your point, Flory, no one really took a class, unless you were in the public health program, around how to deal with the enormity of the issues and challenges that COVID brought, not only physically to people, but also, as Kiara mentioned, emotionally and psychologically to people. And that is something that more employees are asking about. What is the level of care in terms of my capacity as a staff member, but also working with new, expectations around caregiving, around parenthood, around, my being as a BIPOC person. Like there are more considerations that people are listening for, out of what an organization has done in the pandemic and since the pandemic, and how they've operated and changed the ways in which we're going to work together and collaborate together. And so I think it's really hard to simply say, you got to come back into the office. And yet we also have to deal with the duality in our field that we have inherently set up these artificial kind of silos, especially when it comes to administration as opposed to production. I saw it in the midst of the crisis where I was running a center where folks who were able to work from home were able to work from home, but still needing to figure out what were the needs of production in terms of being in person and working safely in person, and still trying to figure out what does it mean to do work, with suddenly a limited amount of space and a limited amount of people in one area. So it's affecting things across the board, but I think what is in a macro sense that continues to be a tension point and an opportunity is where some of that old hierarchical structure from pre-COVID, from pre-2020, is still intersecting with and clashing with what some of those new ways and modes of working that folks are now looking for and looking to do. And I think you have something like a We See White American Theater that came out in 2020 that really helped pave the roadmap for not only how, to address some of the deep racial inequities that we have and marginalization inequities we have, but also what does it mean to be in a workplace that feels collaborative, that feels inclusive, that feels like it's working towards justice, that's caring for its people and not solely caring about the dollar amount. So I think those are some of the different changes, that are happening in the workplace level. And then also, of course, very existential changes in terms of what does this mean for the work that we're putting out into the world? Will audiences come back? Will people continue to support the arts in a meaningful way to allow the work to continue and allow the livelihood of that work to continue?
Al, you've opened up so many avenues for me to go down. I actually have a question in the chat here about whether theaters will likely to continue to allow hybrid or completely remote work. Is your sense, speaking to the different theaters around the country that you deal with, that they will allow it, or is it like Goldman Sachs where everyone needs to come back?
I think honestly, and I think Michael and Kiara can really speak to it too, because you're in it more day to day. But from what I'm hearing, I think hybrid is something that's going to exist. I think there will just be a level of folks who are coming out of programs like SOM, like the School of Drama, and others across the country where, if you're not offering some sort of hybrid, I think people say that may not be the job for me to come to, in that case. Michael, I don't know if you feel differently as a managing leader, but that's my sense, is that I think hybrid is at least here to stay. I think saying you have to do 100% remote is harder. And is a harder lift, arguably, for theaters.
That's a great segue to Michael. I have a question for you, Michael, but if you could respond to that.
No, I think Al's got it nailed. I think the other thing that I would add is it's not, the conversations are not the same as Goldman Sachs because the compensation is not the same as Goldman Sachs. Goldman Sachs can tell you what to do and say you have to be back in the office. And we could do that, but that would be without a recognition that even the people that we pay a living wage, and that's our commitment as an organization to pay everybody what is the MIT living wage here. It's not that much money, and gas prices are up. And to the extent that people can still do their jobs remotely and get the work done, I think it's foolish for us not to accept that this is something that's a valuable benefit for folks.
Here, agree. I think we all agree on that one. I'd love to pivot a bit and talk about the other player in the play, which is the audience. And Michael, from where you sit, I know this is something you think about all the time. Westport is a member of the 6 producing Connecticut theaters. And so we're an association that gathers once a month to share best practice, to support each other. And so certainly I'd love your take on what's going on with the audience, what's going on with subscribers, single ticket buyers. I think, and how are you meeting the audience?
So, and we should come back to the flagship theaters too, if we have time, because that's something that really came out of the pandemic, those monthly meetings and that partnership getting deeper. But with regard to audiences, I think what Chiara said about psychological trauma, the audiences have experienced that same messaging about this is a deadly disease. Our audiences are, my line to people is our average audience member at the Playhouse, she is 62, she has a graduate degree, she has $100,000 of disposable income. That's our core subscriber audience. And she is, now the addendum to that is, she is very sensitive to case counts and hospitalizations and death numbers that come across the news in COVID. And so we've been part of a cohort since, I think it's June of 2020, that an organization called Wolf Brown, a consultancy, has been conducting this audience survey on an ongoing longitudinal basis. And as I was preparing for the webinar today, I was looking at, sort of what audiences need to come back. They've been asking the question, what would make you feel safe? What would make you willing to return? And the short answer is, if you look at the spikes on COVID Act Now, where the case counts are, that's when the I wouldn't come back for any reason number goes up, right? There's not a motion towards anything. It really is very much based in, at least in Connecticut, where case counts are very low. It's not something that's necessarily going in sort of a straight line or a curve towards normalcy. It's herky-jerky, it spikes up, it spikes down, and it does that kind of based on how we're feeling about this particular virus at this particular variant at this particular time. The other piece that I think that's present, though, is that very core audience. When we put subscriptions on sale, and we've now had 2 times that we've put subscriptions on sale since COVID has come back. Within 6 weeks, that's almost 50% of our subscription audience will sign up, kind of no matter what. I mean, then we put the last one on sale in 2021, just before Omicron hit, and that didn't slow down that first tranche of subscribers. We've just put it on sale this year, and that tranche of subscribers is ready to come back. So there are sort of marginal audiences, I think, that we need to bring back, redevelop, and have to be paying attention to COVID for some long period of time. And as I say, until the pandemic ends or people stop paying attention to data. But then there is, and I think the real bright spot, there is this group of people who missed it and are ready to come back kind of no matter what's going on. They'll slap on a mask and be present.
So the challenge, if you have 50% of your subscribers coming back, what do we do about the other 50%? And every theater is experiencing this. Subscriber numbers are down, are absolutely down. One of the things you and I've spoken about is, who is that new audience? Who is coming that didn't come before? And what has that experience been like for your theater?
So, we, like every organization, every theater in the country, did a lot of work on our EDI mission during the deep pandemic, when we weren't producing plays. We're seeing some payoff in communities and individuals that we've been connected to over that period. You can look at the audience, and in Westport, it's actually very easy to identify people of color because there aren't many people of color that live in Westport. And you can see that where that's being filled in, it's being filled in by younger people of color, people who are not that core subscriber that I talked about. But that number of people is not as big as the number of people that have gone missing. So, you know, this is the audience development conversation, but I don't know what the solution is, but I do know what's filling in. It's just not filling it up.
Yeah, I would also just jump in and say that I find it sort of ironic too that we're having like we've been having the where's the new audience conversation for like 60 years. That's not a COVID related question really, and that's not a COVID related problem. COVID may have accelerated a rate of change, but like, I mean, like literally like those exact questions have been part of it for a long, long time. And I think that a piece of this is that I would turn it to say, like, what is our new value proposition? Not where are our new audiences, because it's like, we know that a population of people exist out there. There's no shortage of like humans with money that can pay for a ticket. But I think that this question of like, what is theater doing now that is valuable, that people want to come to? People are still going to restaurants, people are still going to sports games, and people are going to theater. I think that we've known that the subscription model worked for basically a single generation, and then immediately like started to like taper off where it started. And I think that we have a lot of value proposition work and value engineering work to do for our audiences, for our staffs, for ourselves as you know, many of the good ideas. And I think the public is actually a great example. Shakespeare in the Park, great idea. Free Shakespeare in the Park, great idea. People are still coming to Free Shakespeare in the Park. Shakespeare in the Park is everywhere. Everybody has it. There's more, like there's free outdoor Shakespeare all over New York City. So therefore, like, what is, besides that we're the biggest and the fanciest, like, what is our value proposition to the city at this moment for that project? Like, this is a question, you know. And I think that that's part of like what feels exciting too, is like what like of starting by reimagining like what the value could be, and seeing who is on board with that, how we message that, who's on board with that. And I think that that's how we start to get at a next generation of the kinds of loyal fans and that we called subscribers at one point, whether or not they're subscribers now.
I think
I would
that's
just
very
I'm
fair.
sorry.
Yeah, no, I just want to say, you know, we had an audience problem before the pandemic. So, you know, right on to bring that up. Michael, go ahead.
Just one thing that I think Kiara is 100% right about value proposition. One thing that you said sparked in me that it's not, there's the value proposition question. There's also the flee to safe brands. And I think that that's when you said what does the public have, except that we're the largest and the fanciest. People are fleeing from risky things to safe things in larger numbers than they were prior to the. I mean, you'll see our season announcement has 2 musicals and Dial In for Murder in a new adaptation, right? We're looking to provide people with what they're begging for, which is something more like what I already know, something I'm willing to take a chance on, but I'm not necessarily willing to take a chance on this kind of thing I was willing to take a chance on in 2019. And that's just addressing existing audiences. But I think it's an important thing that's happened because there's been so much choice and so much ability to not, you don't have to engage with things you don't like, particularly on your screens. You can watch anything you want to at any time, written by playwrights, a lot of it, and it's really excellent content. So we're competing with that too. Is what's safe enough to come to at a theater, and not just because of COVID.
So I'm glad you brought that up, because I do want to segue back to the work and for all of you. So George Floyd's murder in May of 2020, We See You White American Theater, where hundreds of BIPOC theater artists got together to essentially create a roadmap of what needed to happen, what kind of change needed to happen in the theater field, which has been very discriminatory, very racist for years, very closed shop. When we all prepped for this call, we all talked about just how incredibly positive the change has been in the field. I think a lot of the change has been in the artists we're working with, the work that's being done. I'd love, any of you to sort of talk about, like, let's talk about some of the work. There's some great new work happening. There are work of artists who were never on our stages are finally getting a platform. Does anyone want to chime in on that?
I mean, I think I'll chime in on, a combination of the work that is out there, especially by the global majority, and who is programming the work to be out there by the global majority. And I think that is where arguably there has been progress in terms of the people that we consider auteurs and or curators of who audiences are able to see, what is prioritized or who is prioritized in terms of storytelling. And it takes a level of deep work within an institution in our field in order to now see the fruits of many years' labor in terms of the prominence of artists and folks of color, on our stages in relation to who are those new folks that are allowing and that are sharing and creating a space of safety for that playwright or artist's work to be shared, in a venue that still has a lot of white faces often looking at you. And to Michael's point, I think some folks who say, I don't know if I consider that risky because it's outside of my skin experience, versus finding it something that I'm more intrigued by and captivated by because of the values that I might hold in association with a theater. And so I think it was yesterday I was talking to Debbie Chen, who was just named the executive director out of TheaterWorks and used to be the managing director out at Baltimore Center Stage. And thinking about how progress looks in relation to the time frame that we have been in. And so she spoke about, listen, when I was, at Baltimore Center Stage in the mid 2000s, there were no other, real BIPOC, especially BIPOC women managing directors in the League of Resident Theaters cohort. And so feeling that loneliness to today, where you see more artistic and managing director pairings that are allowing this work and finding the roots and the champion of deep work that's being done in terms of EDIA and racial equity work. And what can also be true is that we have a ways to go. We have to keep leaders within our field, in our institutions, where they feel that they can be inhabitable, where they feel that they will be given a chance, where they feel that they are not there for a sense of tokenism or just to simply be a face. And so where we have had often, I feel, at least as a Black person just being in America, frankly, that there are moments in these movements that come with great joy and great pain. And what is hard, I think, for me to reckon with and to continue to see is that you can have the great joy of someone like Debbie Chen being named the executive director at TheaterWorks out in California, and you can have the great pain of what happened to Ken Matt Martin out at Victory Gardens. And so that's where I find, especially talking with staffs, talking with boards, people are looking for this end game and end goal. And the truth is that there isn't one. It is only about progress. And I think until we accept that this level of progress also comes with a level of pain and joy that comes in the morning, so to speak, That's where we have to get used to this new kind of cycle in terms of what we're moving towards when we're seeing that progress being made. And recognizing that you can have a level of artists of color who are getting major platforms, and you also have folks of color and white allies who are working behind the scenes to very much convince a board or convince a staff or a level of donor that this work, needs to be at our theater and on our stages and in front of our audiences.
Yeah, I really appreciate, Al, you taking this question and talking about, because I think that the actual biggest levers that we have is around how we make things. The truth about like programming is that there's no dearth of things that you can program. There's no, like, I could program a million seasons, like hundreds of seasons every which way with no white artists to be found. And number one, it wouldn't make up for the generations of exclusion. And number two, it wouldn't solve racism at our institutions. I think that very frequently we look for like the most visible things that you can do, which is like casting, without considering all of the different ways of not just of yes, who is making it, who is touching it, who is working at every single level of our organization, but also literally how we make the work. And so my focus, and maybe this is obviously my bias as a producer, is really interrogating all the different aspects of how, and understanding that not all artists have the same agenda. Not all artists you can't actually apply the exact same producing structure to every single one. You can't, we would love to say, it is actually not what I know to be true is that the same artist for whom a certain way of working that feels really inclusive and really great, really does not work for every artist. And there's also a really big generational gap. There's a big racial gap. And when you're working with a broad spectrum of people, and that's just artists. Meanwhile, I think that what we also don't talk about is the way that our staffs actually aren't aligned, our theaters aren't aligned, our audiences aren't aligned. We create the false illusion through things like TCG, through things which I love, that we all have the same values and we actually are all working towards the same goals and we all believe in certain things. But I don't believe that we actually are unified like that. I don't believe that we have the same agendas. I don't believe that we have the same ways of doing things. And I think that's a problem. That's a problem if what we expect is some sort of like unified front. And so I think that I'm with Al that the thing that we can do is we can figure out what our values are as managers, but also as people on all levels of staff, and we can work in our little corners to like keep steering our part of the boat more and more towards that. And so the thing that I am focused on agnostic of programming, because again, there's no dearth of incredibly talented writers and artists and auteurs and directors and designers and everybody, but agnostic of programming, really thinking about what are the ways of working that for this project that would cause no harm, and in fact leave people maybe more whole. And because a process, like a good process, creates a good product. And I think that is like the most important thing for us to focus on.
I love this conversation. We're talking about plays and we go right into ethos and our values and how we work. And that is the theater, right? We go from the art to how we do it, to the people, to the audiences. I want to start looking at the questions in the chat, and there was a great one here about boards, and I'm thinking about our audience today on this webinar, and there maybe folks in the audience that are board members or potential board members of theater companies. You may be donors. You may want to get into philanthropy, and so that leads into funding. So if we could, the question is really about, what are boards doing? How are boards functioning in terms of addressing these challenges? And then if we could also, the part two of it, talk about, what can folks do who want to be a donor, who want to get more involved, who want to be on a board?
I'll take this one just to start. So we have a board now of 32 people. We have a maximum of 50, and that's what we're aiming to have. And part of that process of getting to those numbers was going through how exclusionary our processes really were, right? Identifying as the goal of the Board of Trustees that it really be a representative sample of the community and not just a club for our major donors. And this was something that was actually, Mark and I brought, Mark, my artistic director, and I brought this to our board chair at the time. But once we brought it up, it was really very much board driven. There are two individuals on the board who are now our EDI co-chairs who really took that and ran with it. And we've got a very active nominating committee as a result. We lost a couple of people who didn't like the way that was going, most of whom are still kind of involved, but not on the board anymore. But I think that the real question around governance is what are they doing here, right? And for me, the question is, for boards right now, and this is reflective of current personal experience, is the thing that is needed at these organizations more than anything now, or at least at my organization, is that the board needs to support the mission. And here it's a tripartite mission where it's artistry, education, and equity, right? That's all that we talk about. That's all that we make and that we do. But I can't, what I don't want, and what we've experienced a little bit, is when you disagree, you got to do it in committee. You got to be out there in the world boostering right now, because it's existential. We can talk as a family offline and figure out where we're going, but really what's wanted right now is, how do we get those 76 trombones in 32 mouths? Say, I'm mixing my metaphors, but going out in the community and being a real ambassador in a way that trustees really haven't been historically, certainly not here, where they really were, people who wrote checks and gave advice. That's not going to cut it anymore. Now we need boosters.
Yeah, I would also say that, and like the next webinar I'd like to be invited back to is talking to future board members of America, because I really think that that very frequently board people that are on boards, they get very far into the weeds of operations because it's easy to do, and I totally respect the impulse. But I think that we need boards, especially in theaters, that respect their leaders and respect the expertise of their staff and know what their expertise is and leverage that. Like the whole point of a nonprofit board, in my opinion, or like the biggest value proposition for them is that this is a lot of people that have deep ties to their community. Ideally, these are people that have and they have a specific, like, I think that everybody on a board should know why they're there and should have a specific reason to be there. You are here specifically because you are a finance expert and we need you. You are here because you have deep ties to this community organization and we really have a deep partnership with this relation, and we really want to foster this relationship more. You are here to give money. You are here because you are a rich person and we need you because of that. So like, we need your stewardship and we need you, and you know other rich people, so we need you to help us raise money. And I think that putting together a sort of like Avengers team, and then those people doing that the best they can, because like we have people that pick the plays. That's not what we need. We need people that can do all this other stuff and like really force multiply a staff. And that's what I really hope for a board. And I think that that's also how you get away from some of these trends that we're seeing of boards really being obstructionist or like subverting their leaders' authority, leading to situations like we had at Victory Gardens. Which are disproportionately happening to the artistic directors of color that are out there, who are not being trusted, with the jobs that they receive, and then are being like deeply hamstrung by not just their boards. And that's to say that like I think that lots of boards are there are lots of individuals on boards that are really great. And as units, sometimes they can cause a lot of harm. And I think that that's something that we need to be really aware of and to not participate in if we want to join them.
This is such a great conversation. I hope Al's going to hop in on this one. We've covered like 3 or 4 questions, the issues of, board overreach, board pipeline. And Kayla Heaslip, I hope you heard that Yakiara's just volunteered to be on a panel about boards, because I think, that could be where it's at. But Al, do you have something you want to add? Because I know you've been very passionate on the issue of boards.
Only briefly, in the sense of, I think when I saw one of the pieces was about, in particular looking, working with boards through a racial and equity lens. And I think the biggest challenge that I have found, or at least have seen, is the level in which, one, I think sometimes we as theater practitioners and also as board members feed a kind of mythology about our organizations. And how our organizations operate, and that we are the best, we are absolutely great, we do great work, we are better than everyone, this is an amazing place to work, we do amazing work. And I think what the pandemic and George Floyd's murder started to expose is that mythology true? And what's hard, and I think what is twisting for a lot of folks, especially if you're interested in being on board, is that if you're interested in just giving money, sure, we need you there. And what I would ask is, are you interested in wandering through the wilderness of the organization and yourself? Because that's where the change begins to happen. Are you as a board member willing to call in another board member and say, listen, you are giving our artistic director of color a hellish hard time. Like, you have to pull back, or we need you to be realigned here. And I think going through that wilderness for people is difficult for anyone, because frankly, we've done that for the past 2.5 years in a pandemic. And it's just harder when something like a leadership surge asks the question, who is this organization now? And who will you be in the future?
Hear, hear. That's great. We've got 2 questions here about skill sets and leadership. So I'm going to try to combine them, mash them together, and hope that our panelists will jump in. So what new skills do you feel you've gained at this time that you've never had to use before, that you had to draw on because your jobs have changed? And what skill sets are you looking for at your institutions, or as a search firm, clients are looking for leaders in the field? So it's a 2-part: new skills you've had that you've had to draw on that you haven't had to lean on before, and then what skills are we looking for?
I mean, I'll just chime in quickly to say that I sort of 2 thoughts. One is, I think for myself, having to really think in an entrepreneurial way about how searches operated when you couldn't get people together, how you evaluated people when you couldn't get people together. So I think, and what that leads into for my second point is, I think having to have a level of strategic attunement to the environment, to what people are looking for, to how theaters are positioning themselves, is something that I think I am starting in my consultant life to really, home in on in terms of a skill set that I need to focus on. And I think it's what folks are looking for in leaders, is that, can you look out in the environment and actively be able to react, or have enough of a nimbleness within the organization to react. And I think that's hard to put into practice, but I do think it's something that more and more boards are looking for out of leaders. When we're in this crisis moment, will you be there, and can you respond effectively for the organization?
Yeah.
Thank you, Al. Michael,
Oh,
Kiara?
I mean, I think that soft skills are something that you need, that have been really, really important in this period. And to Al's line of work, I think boards undervalue them in the hiring process pretty substantially. But I think the most important thing, particularly in working with staff and working with artists across the deep pandemic, when there was less work being made and there were things being canceled and people being furloughed, just having a well of empathy to draw on, even as you are suffering your own, personal, your personal, walking your own personal path. The other thing that I would bring up in this context is collaboration amongst organizations. One of the things that I've been deeply grateful for in this period is the Connecticut Flagship Producing Theaters Group that has started to get together on a regular basis. I also know that we would not have done even as well as we did in terms of managing everything throughout the pandemic without being a member of LORT. And LORT, League of Resident Theaters, has its own problems, but one of the things I was very proud of that the League of Resident Theaters did in this period was prove to our union partners that we were good partners in COVID and that we could keep people safe. And that actually allowed us, there was a question in the chat about how we deal with unions. That proof for Actors Equity particularly allowed us to kind of set our own protocols, which made our lives easier in Connecticut because we had low case counts and we could do less stuff and still keep people safe without sort of living under a diktat. So those kinds of collaborations have been really important.
Yeah, I would say that in terms of like hard skills, I think that in addition to being an amateur epidemiologist, I think that like just simply learning more and more about like film and about like the mechanics of what it takes to do to put theater on film, and trying to like just logistically, I think that those are like the hard skills that I feel like I learned a lot. But I really think that maybe this is just a sort of a side tangent of this question, but like the thing that this makes me really think about is how actually really, really crucial it is to have to like apply a more expansive view. I think that very frequently in theater, we turn to other theaters and we turn to other theater people, which I think is correct, to figure out like what we ought to do next. When I think that increasingly, first of all, we live in like such a more connected world and everything is so interconnected. We are relying more and more on our hyperlocal communities. And so figuring out what everybody else is doing in other fields, applying, I think that I've always had an interest in frameworks with other businesses. I think that if theater, like we've been talking about a different model for a million bajillion years also, so I think since we made this model, and yet we keep getting closer and closer together. And so I think that we have a lot to learn from just other businesses as we continue to consider like what the future for theater is. I think like personally, I think that it looks a lot more like partnering with other industries. I think that it looks like thinking of ourselves more as like sort of like the way that the public libraries started to think of themselves as, yes, we like books are still our primary thing, and yet what we realize is that people need us for air conditioning, people need us for job development, people need us for internet, and people need us for Narcan, and I think that is an exciting prospect. And I think that other industries, like we do a lot of like theater is not film and film is not theater and TV, and yet we have a lot of people, we have artists that are porous, and yet our organizations aren't. And so I'll also just like sort of throw in this question about streaming and all of that, is that I think that just like our skill sets and the ways that we work are not likely to snap back. I never had any interest in going back. I'm very interested in going forward and seeing what happens. I think that that we as a theater field are our own worst enemies of always being like, this is not theater and this is not theater and you stay away and you stay away and you stay away. And so I think that as we move forward, we have to start figuring out the little ways to start embracing like new ideas, new things, new asset classes, new revenue streams, new like in addition to new ways of doing things, because I think that that's the future. And it doesn't mean that what we have now is going to go away. It doesn't mean that theater is going to go away just because you also start streaming it, or that somehow we're going to replace each other. I think that there's a lot of possibility out there as long as we look forward and not backward or inward exclusively.
That's a beautiful way to end our conversation because we are at time. I want to thank my panelists. What an inspiring, exciting, illuminating, lively conversation. And I want to thank everyone for signing on and joining the Yale SOM Exchange webinar. I particularly want to thank Kayla Heaslip from SOM for gathering us and making this conversation happen. And please look forward to future conversations. We hope we all get invited back for something. And thank you so much. Bye-bye.